Okay, I think we're ready to go. We are. Welcome everybody. I'm Peter Grinnell, General Manager of the San Mateo County Harbor District. We are the local sponsor with and for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers San Francisco District, which is the lead agency on the Surfers Beach project. Just for the record, the Corps' official name of the project is the North Half Moon Bay Shoreline Improvement Project, but all of us and the Corps know that area as Surfers Beach. And so today's meeting is yet another in an ongoing series of public meetings that the Army Corps periodically convenes as part of its regular project development process. We anticipate there will be further meetings as time goes on. And the basic purpose of today's meeting is to have the Corps district folks update you all on the status of the project, next steps, and secondly, to receive input from you, comments, questions, and so on, that they can make use of as the project proceeds. And so the agenda, if you will, for this morning is a very simple one. I will stop talking in about 30 seconds after introducing John Dingler from the Army Corps, who will be making a presentation to you, basically informing you of the current status of the project. After that, we will open up the meeting to questions and answers, and that's basically the purpose of today's meeting. I would like to just mention that present today are County Supervisors Don Horsley and Carol Groom, who are here. There are several other agency people. Coastal Commission is represented, County Government is represented, and so on. And again, members of the public. So without further ado, I will ask John to step up and make his presentation.
Thank you all for coming. A little background. I know a lot of you because I've lived in this area for several decades before moving to Portland. My first career was with the USGS Menlo Park coastal oceanographer, and I got to get paid for going to the beach, and I often did. And among other projects was working on some cliff studies here in the Half Moon Bay area, and I surfed a lot all along the coast here. So this is an interesting project and by itself, but it's interesting even more so to me because of my interests and background. So as Peter said, I'm just going to go through the status of the project. It'll take, I don't know, we'll see how long it takes, 45 minutes, half hour. I would like you to withhold questions and comments until I'm done. I think we'll go through, take a break, and then the rest of the time till 12 o'clock sharp, we will entertain questions. We'll respond. We have a group of the team, several of the team members here, and we'll take comments. And as for comments, there are these cards around, our official Corps comment card, and we would definitely like, if you have anything that you want to leave with us, things we might forget, things that you feel are really important, fill those out and leave them behind with us. So with that, I will get started.
Enter your magic pin.
Mm-hmm.
Enter your magic pin.
Oh, the magic pin. Yes, if I do this wrong 3 times, the show's over. Yes. You know, and those cards that we carry, they are so protected that if you misenter your PIN 3 times in a row, it locks it and you have to go to security somewhere in the country to get it unlocked. So I'm going to be giving you the details, the status of this project, the North Half Moon Bay Shoreline Improvement Project. It's a project under one of the Corps' authorities called a Continuing Authorities Program, and it comes from Section 111 of one of the numerous Water Resource Development Acts that Congress periodically passes. They're supposed to do it every 2 years. Well, right now we're, 6 years into one, and they're fighting it out to get a new one. These CAP projects are non-specific in that, in terms of they don't recognize a given study. Certain kinds of studies are defined. And the 111 project is the general category is mitigation of shoreline damages caused by a Corps of Engineers project. And this is appropriate for this study because of the breakwater and what seemed to be, well, there was significant change in erosion south of the breakwater once it was built and deposition to the north of it. Well, let's see, there we go. So just to give our setting here, the upper left image is a 1956 photograph. The breakwater construction started in 59, 58, 59. So you can see that we have a curved, relatively smooth shoreline that goes down Miramontes Point, curves around Pillow Point Harbor. Then on the bottom below that is the 2010 photograph just showing you the location of the breakwater, the harbor that the two breakwaters have permitted, have constructed, have created. You can see just above the arrow and to the left there's some fill, and you can't see it in this one, the erosion, but that'll become apparent as we go on. Then the large image is a map that's showing smooth contours that were taken in the past few years, location of the breakwaters. The shaded yellow area is our project footprint. It starts in the harbor, covers the area along the shoreline, along the inside of the east jetty, or breakwater, excuse me, and goes down to Mateo Creek, so about a mile. That contains the Surfers Beach area that's riprap, revetted, the open area, the Vallejo Beach area that's not protected, and then the Miramar area, again, where there's rock revetment. So these photos, just to give you a setting, 2011, relatively recent. The one on the top you need to wrap your mind around. It's actually a 180 panorama that I took standing on the breakwater, starting looking shoreward and ending up looking seaward, and then just spliced them together. So the rock is, that's our breakwater, it's continuous. But the point of it is to show the extent of the fill, the sand. We have vegetated areas now. Those create habitat. When we get into a project, we're going to have to factor in habitat issues. So it's not just as if we have a lot of sand there, we have sand and more. The bottom left photograph is just looking around Surfers Beach, lower tide, and you might note that there's actually sand up in the corner, up close. And you know, some of our modeling, which we'll talk about later, suggests that there is some northward transport as well as southward transport of what little sand there is there. Then the other photograph on the right bottom is erosion along Vallejo. Something that I, with Monty Hampton, looked at a decade or so ago in terms of cliff bluff failures, and he came up with some conclusions about failures not necessarily in this beach, this area being caused by the direct attack of waves and undercutting, but by failure of slippage along plains, muddy surfaces, subsurfaces. The top image is from a poster by one of the USGS scientists, Ken LaJoy, and others. He spent a lot of time looking at this area, and it may be hard to read, but in essence, the red, the outer line, is the 1861 shoreline, and the red, the other side of the red, is about where the shoreline was when the breakwater was constructed. So everything from the orangey color into the green is erosion subsequent to the construction of the breakwater. And I also added on this some information that came out of the study, the modeling that we will talk about later, I'll present later. And we found that the bluff retreat rate from between 93 and 2012 is about a ½ meter per year at Vallejo, the unprotected part of the beach. Now the bottom left image is the breakwater under construction. And it's a little hard, but if you look right, let's see if I can get my arrow to work here. Does that show? Okay, if you look in this area, it seems as if maybe we're already getting some sand filling in there. But it's, from this image, it's hard to tell. And so the right image, the right photograph, is an overlay of two aerial photographs, 56 and 2010, of which they were rectified, and then the bluff lines traced. So you get an idea of the change in bluff location over that period of time. These images are from Ken LaJoy posters and from his research. On the left side, we have the shoreline pre-breakwater. It's what is called an equilibrium shoreline. Over the decades, over the years, not in just any one year, but over the years, the waves have worked the shoreline into a shape which minimizes longshore transport. The net shape has to do with all the waves coming in from different directions over that time period, refracting around and creating a shape that allows for the minimum movement of sand along the coast. And these circles that you see up here are important. These are measured bluff retreat rates in meters per year, and between 1861 and 1956. Now note that this one, which is in about the area that we're talking about, 1/10 of a meter. Remember on the last slide I said that since 1993 we've had 5/10 of a meter. So even now, they're in the unprotected part, there is notably increased erosion rate over pre-breakwater conditions. The right image gives a schematic of the change in wave patterns, wave crest patterns because of the breakwater, and the way that it focuses energy just south of the breakwater, creating the situation we have with increased erosion. Oops. That's not what I wanted. So we have the project. It's a CAP project. It's a general authority. And there we go, CAP 111, mitigation of damages caused by a federal navigation project. I inserted the word future and emphasized it because these projects are looking forward. Yes, we acknowledge that this erosion has gone on since the breakwater, this increased erosion and increased deposition inside the harbor. But the authority says that we can mitigate for what would happen in the future after the project is, a new project is constructed. So that means we can't go back, we can't put things back, we have to look forward. In fact, I would say that if you read closely enough, it would say that you would only mitigate for whatever is above the natural. So if it's 1/10 of a meter a year, erosion would be natural from way back when, and we're doing 5/10, we would mitigate for 4/10. That's cutting it pretty thin, that's dicing it, that's because there's a lot. But anyway, the whole idea is it's for future erosion. So because it's CAP project, we don't need congressional authorization. We don't need specific appropriation. The law or the act, the authority carries a $5 million government payment, funding limit. And that funding is, the total funding is going to be shared with the non-federal sponsor, in this case the Harbor District. So the project can actually have a price tag of over $5 million, but the Corps can only pay up to $5 million. Now on the bottom schematic we have the different phases that a Corps project in general goes through. We have 2 planning phases, the reconnaissance, which was done in 2009. We developed, what we did at that point was look to see if it was reasonable to continue with a CAP 111 project. If we really had caused this, if we were responsible for this damage and should look into a mitigation procedure. That's what we have, this 216 IA initial assessment report concluded. So then we went into the second part of the planning phase, the feasibility phase, which is where we are now. And that's to look at whether it's feasible to do something. And feasible doesn't just mean can we build it, because we can build it. Certainly in something like this, we can do anything that would be reasonable to do. Is it feasible under Corps rules and regulations in terms of costs and benefits and input from the public? So if we reach the end of that, we have a detailed report which will be submitted to the San Francisco division. If they approve it, then we can go on into the next phase, which is the design phase, then construction, and then after it's all constructed, it has to be operated and maintained, and monitoring if necessary. So the planning process, I looked hard for this. We have this thing that looks like a beehive that nobody can possibly understand with all the arrows, but this pretty much explains the process that we go through in the feasibility phase, the planners, of which I am one. I used to be a coastal oceanographer. Now I'm a Corps plan formulator. I'm part of a team, and my role is to develop these plans, such as this detailed report that will be going forward. So we go through these various steps. I won't go through all of them. The arrows just indicate that it's it's a repetitive process. And we may get down to step 5 and see something where we go back up to step 2. But anyway, hopefully at some point we'll come out the bottom with a plan that will go forward for division approval. And right now we're in this, what we would say are step 4, where we have alternate plans that we're evaluating. And that's where I'll be focusing most of the rest of the talk. But before I get that, we do have this economics issue. Our projects have to be approved based on certain guidelines, and we call these accounts, the system of accounts. And the one on top, the NED, is by far the one that carries the most weight, the National Economic Development. It really looks at this project in terms of the economy and impacts on the nation. And it's driven by what we call a benefit to cost ratio. What are the benefits from doing this? And we try to put a dollar sign on them as best we can. There are core rules, guidelines, how much. Well, some things are pretty straightforward. If you have infrastructure that costs $50 million that's going to be lost, you can work that as a number, we can. But how do you put a dollar sign on recreation? So it gets tougher. We have guidelines. We have an expert on this team to work with that. And then there are the costs. What does it cost to build something or move something? Then there are these 3 other accounts that are of less importance but can come into play. There's a regional economic development account. And that is, maybe of more importance in a project like this, which is a smaller project, which is really a regional effort. There's an environmental quality, and there's this one called other social effects. And all of these may come into play, and by the way, they could all be negative. They could have a positive impact, or they could have a negative impact. Okay, what are some NED benefits? These are not all necessarily related to this project, but this is the kind of thing that we looked at. Recreational opportunities, protect infrastructure, improve navigation, property, habitat protection. Now that's always a tough one, is to put a dollar sign on protecting and creating habitat, but again we have guidelines for that, and sometimes that falls in the other accounts. So costs, building hard structures. Not always popular, but sometimes necessary. Soft structures such as beach fill, dune creation, then adaptive management. How do we work moving something, in this case moving Highway 1 or moving homes or something else, so that the coastline can retreat. So again, going back to the big one, NED, if it's not 1, if it's 1 or greater, then that's a positive and we can put it forward. But a number like 1, 1.2, 1.5 doesn't really ensure that it's going to be funded. Remember, there's 2 things, authorization and appropriation. We have the authorization, that's the cap. Project. But again, it has to be funded. There's a pot of money for CAP that the Corps has, and there's competition for that pot of money. And so even though there is money in the Corps coffers, doesn't mean that we would, with a 1.0 or 1 point whatever, we would be up high enough up the chain. And then on larger projects, if this were to go to something else, the way the climate is right now, if it's below some number, like 2.5, though that's not a number you want to write down, it varies, but that's to give you an idea of how high the benefits have to be to the cost to really have a project that would be pushed forward. Again, with CAP, it's not as important, but again, the higher the benefit to cost ratio, the higher, easier it is to move forward. So if it's less than 1, it's a negative finding. We say that, yes, we are responsible for this, but by the core guidelines, by the core rules and regulations, we can't justify a project. And that's when these other accounts can come into play, and we can go other routes. People have talked about some sort of a demonstration project that would have to do with other entities such as the Marine Sanctuary, with the this group called CSMW, which is a work group of state and federal agencies. And it's possible to go for different authorities. If something were to be specified, called out, well, these are now earmarked, so they aren't very prevalent. They aren't prevalent and mostly almost non-existent. But if it's in the past, if it had been specified in a word bill as North Half Moon Bay will happen, and then it could go forward that way. So now we're going to talk about the modeling that we are doing. One of the most important things is to roles in this part of the project, well, throughout the project actually, are the coastal engineers and the work that they do to see what different alternatives what effect they'll have and what kind of project can be designed based on the information we have. And the several slides after this that I'll be showing you are based on a numerical model that's been developed by the Corps. It's approved, it's used nationally and perhaps internationally. It looks at bringing waves into a coast and then understanding the transport processes. It's set up in a grid, so you have a grid of, and at each point you have incoming wave conditions, and then they change based on exact formulas. And this is the grid, the area that was considered for this model. And what happens is that waves are brought in on the edge of the model, and then the model program starts working and moving all the information or all the waves in and looking at the transport along the coast. The grid size varies in the outer part. Often it's fairly widely spaced, but when you get in close, it can be a few meters or 10 meters or something like that. So we're looking at a fairly tightly gridded area. These runs take hours, if not days sometimes. The big ones can take days to go through several months of information. So the first thing we did was to look at the potential transport for the existing conditions. When we do a feasibility study, the first thing we look at is what is going on and what would happen if we did nothing. And so this is a model that looks at the coast. It changes over a 6-month period, June to November 2009. That time was chosen because we put some instruments out. We have wave measurements for that period of time. And so that's what we're using, basing our model on it. And so we're looking at over that period of time, and hopefully you can kind of pick this up. We have the changes in the near shore, red being the greatest amount of erosion, and the blue is a deposition, and we're looking in terms of changes in that time period of units in meters, so tenth or minus 3/10 of a meter to positive 3/10 are the range of the contours. And the first box, the largest box, goes from the breakwater down to the northern edge of the Miramar revetment, and then the other box covers the revetment. And so we came and we tested a couple of different scenarios. One, this first one we calling the maximum beach fill design, takes all of the sand that's inside the breakwater that has been deposited. That is, it goes all the way back to the 1956 bluff line, shapes the beach, takes all that sand, ignores that there's habitat there, and so in that case, we have something between 200 and 250,000 cubic yards that we can use. So that would be the maximum, without respect to anything else, habitat. And so then we would put that on front of the beach, and we designed it to go from the breakwater down to the north end of the Miramar revetment. And then the little cross section shows you how we would construct what that beach would look like when we started. And that would be done over a relatively short period of time, and then we would see what happened. And so the model would say for that same period, June to November, that we had this situation with erosion on the beach, material coming off the beach, and so in this area we're getting erosion, and in the near shore we're getting accretion, deposition. And this you might expect because we have an entirely new shape with a lot of sand in that area, and waves are going to adjust it over time. Then we have another scenario that we tested that we felt was more realistic, and that is to take the material, the sand that was along the inside of the south or the east breakwater down to a depth of 10 feet and move that onto the beach and build a similar structure, but now we would have 140 to 150,000 cubic yards. So you can see that we're giving up, or we're leaving behind in that beach area, habitat area, 100,000 or a little less than 100,000 cubic yards. So again, we have the same thing. You see a very similar pattern and erosion on the beach and some deposition in the near shore. Now, these numbers, we have a lot of data on this. People can go to our coastal engineers and get more information. This is just an overview to give you an idea of what's going to happen. So, a tentative conclusion, which is going to be on TV and on the record, but I still say this is just an interpretation of 1 year's worth of modeling, and it carries all the caveats. So using that medium beach fill scenario, we might get 24,000 cubic yards of sand removed from the footprint of the created beach in a year, which would mean the beach might have, the part of the beach that you would see might have a lifetime of 6 years. Now, that's typical. This was not an El Nino year. There's a lot of this, what if, what if. But anyway, this is just a feeling, so several years. However, if we consider the sand in those whole boxes which go offshore into the near shore, a lot of that sand stays longer. And so, it might be a couple, 3 decades, that there might be some remnants of that sand within those boxes that I showed you from the model runs. So beach itself gone in several years, which means you're losing protection of the bluff face itself, but increased sand in the near shore, which will have its own benefits. It can certainly in certain times of the year be pushed back onto the shore. It also could cause wave breaking a little farther offshore, so that wave energy is dissipated a little farther away from the bluffs. So now, the study schedule, I've got this list here. I won't read it. I'll leave it up for a couple minutes or a minute for you all to look at. But in essence, we're looking at various alternatives. And the 2 that I just showed you, there are other alternatives that we would look at, such as opening the jetty or the breakwater for flow to go in and out, building hard structures, putting protective material in front of the Vallejo area, building groins, building offshore, submerged structures. Those will all be discussed, and they'll all be considered. If they're fairly expensive compared to what we see are our benefits, then they would be rejected without a lot of modeling. We don't have a lot of funding for this. Relatively speaking, runs are expensive, and so we weed some of these out just because they don't make sense either cost-wise or environmentally, or the public would not. You will give us comments and say, no, we don't want to build groins. We don't want to put rock in front of Vallejo. And then we'll develop this detailed public report. We'll do an environmental analysis. Those will go forward to the division. CAP projects, the approval authority lies with the division. It does not go to headquarters, except in unusual circumstances. And so if the division accepts the feasibility report, then we would move on. If not, we would have a negative report that would be released. We do need to talk about some of the things that go into the planning, some of the things that if we were able to move forward, will be issues. And one of them is the sanctuary. The footprint of the sanctuary comes all the way along the shoreline, comes all the way up to the edge of the harbor, and covers a fairly wide area beyond that. And there are very well spelled out rules and regulations about mining material and placing material in the sanctuary. They at this time seem to be at odds with some of the things that we might propose, because placing sand from inside the harbor to outside the harbor, which will be putting material into the sanctuary even on the beach because it goes up to high tide. So there's a lot of discussions both on this project and in the bigger sense, because this question comes up all the way from San Francisco to Monterey, where there are communities, where there are structures, where there is erosion that's causing concern to the communities. And so we're working with the sanctuary, state and federal agencies, to come up with some way to carry out nourishment, beneficial use projects. So we have expectations that we will be able to go forward with certain kinds of projects if approved. Every project has what we call a project development team. These are the members of the team that's working on this project. It isn't all of them because some different kinds of expertise come in at different times in the project life. But economics, engineering, the planning, and environmental are there from the beginning, and so they're the important elements for this project at this time. And on the left are the names of these people. They're all in the room, except for Frank. So Mark Bierman is, and I'll just, he's here. He's both the project manager, but foremost, he's the economist. He's the one that does the economic analysis. And so when we get on and you have an economics question later today or comment, I'm going to point you to him. Craig and James are the coastal engineers. James has been running the models. James is here, and Craig's hiding behind the post and back. And Richard Stratford is going to be doing the environmental assessment. He's right there. And so all of us are in the room for you to talk to, talk at, question, whatever, once we get into the next part of this meeting. And here's contact information for some of us. I've also added Tom Kendall at the bottom, who's here. He's the chief of the planning branch for the San Francisco district. He's a resident of the coast, and he's a longtime surfer. So he has a lot of interest for various reasons in this project also. And I believe that's it. So I would say, I don't know what time it is, let's take 5 minutes stretch, get your thoughts together, and when we come back, we'll go into the public discussion. And I can bring the slides back up. I forgot to tell you they were numbered. If you managed or remembered, we can just go directly to slides and talk about it. Thank you.
I'd like to make one brief announcement while you're all together here. If I could have your attention for purposes of public information. Hello! Can I get your attention, please? This is for your benefit. We've asked PCTV to be here today, and so as we have had them in the past, and will continue at such meetings like this, this whole proceeding will be available in two ways. One, directly from PCTV, either streaming or if you wish, your own CD of it. Also, we will have it on the Harbor District website, www.smharbor.com. So you should be aware that all of this information you're seeing can be directly available to you. So I just want you to be aware of that. Thanks.
Okay.
So we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Let's say 5 to 30.
Activities or issues or concerns. Max, where are you? You can just speak. He's offered. He's here. You can come up and speak to him directly, aside from any questions you may present to us. Secondly, there are sign-in sheets, several of them making rounds. Anyone who has not filled out your name and contact information, we urge you to do that for two reasons. One, we'd like to know who's here today, but more importantly, so that we can be sure to keep you informed of what's happening with the project, future meetings, and so on. So please fill those out. Now, as was mentioned by John, the Army Corps had comment cards sent around. If there are those who have filled them out, written down anything, if we can perhaps collect those, that might be one way we can proceed. Otherwise, if you haven't done that, you just want to raise your hand, we'll try to serially pick up your questions and comments. There's a microphone that'll go around so that everyone can hear you and so that it gets on the recording. Again, I want to alert you that via TCTV and the Corps, we will have this whole presentation available. It'll take a little while, but we will get it on the Harbor District website, and it's also going to be available directly from PCTV. So with that, I'm just going to ask for questions and comments, and John and the Corps team will answer them, and Max as needed.
Yeah. My name's Monty Hampton. I'm a local resident, and I used to work with John at the USGS. John, I was talking to Orville Magoon one time, who probably many people in this room know. He used to work for the Army Corps, and I think was involved in the design and construction of the breakwater. But he said that to him, the answer to this problem, as far as the erosion on the beach, would be just to put a small wing out on the south end of the breakwater and deflect the currents coming in rather than trying to keep replacing the sediment. Do you have a comment on that?
It's not something we've modeled yet, but it's something that we will consider in our alternatives. So I don't have a comment on it now. I guess that's something for the next, but that's what we're looking for, is suggestions like that, things that we probably haven't thought of. We've thought of certain kinds of structures, but nothing specific like that, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Battaglio. I just wanted to follow up on what Monty said. As I think we want to consider the impact on surfing when we look at these types of structures, and I know that the Corps is considering recreation and the like in a multi-objective sense. I think that might work, but I'm a little concerned that it would interfere with the waves reflecting off the jetty, which is one of the, I guess, unintended but beneficial consequences of the jetty for certain.
Behind you. Oh. Next.
Leonard Warren, El Granada. I think it's fair to say that I would speak for a lot of the community in that any solution has to be a lasting solution that doesn't require ongoing funding, because we know what happens when budgets change. And that means fixing the breakwater, not having an ongoing program of transporting sand. And what's really obvious to most of us who live here and have looked at the aerial photos is that you have two things going on. One is that the sand coming out of Denniston Creek is blocked by the breakwater and doesn't make it to Surfers Beach where it used to before the breakwater was built. And the other is the change in wave action. And Ken LaJoy said in 1999 that, quote, "I could design a better breakwater in 5 minutes on the back of a napkin." That's an exact quote from Ken LaJoy. So you have to fix the breakwater, and the absolute minimum you have to do is breach the breakwater to allow the sand to flow through where it used to flow.
Keith Mangold, El Granada. One of the things that I noticed was that a lot of the data that came from this thing came from 2009, and I think one of my concerns is that there hasn't been an El Nino in this area since 1998, and during El Nino years are when changes really occur rapidly, and we see massive erosion. And so I wondered, has that somehow been factored in, or will it be factored into these studies going forward?
I'm going to pass that down to James, who'll talk about the modeling on that, and he might also touch on Bob's comment or some of the others.
Okay, anyone hear me? So in terms of the El Nino issue, kind of the first cut with modeling was to look at a typical year so we could make some extrapolation based on that. But yes, the question is, certainly we do want to see how beach fill and other alternatives would perform under a strong El Nino year. I mean, I think 97, 98, there probably would be good wave data we can use from them. That would be a good candidate. We would confirm that with folks who are here on the coast and witness what was going on. But that would be a next logical step, you know. But we are limited in funding, so we do have to really optimize what sort of modeling and engineering work we want to do. But I mean, looking at the impacts of El Nino is definitely going to be on the to-do list before anything gets to the design phase. And what was the other? Oh, John.
I did want to go back to Bob's comment about the surfing. Understanding the wave climate and effects on other things besides just the beach is integral to this study. So things such as surfing and other types of recreational activities on the beach and even on the breakwater itself will be factored into our analysis.
Hi, Bill Keogh. I want to follow up on the gentleman's question about El Nino because that was one of mine. Are you still continuing to collect data? It seemed to me that there was only a short period of time there, so you have a fairly limited data set to do complete modeling. And then the second question I had was you were discussing cost ratios, and you had a point system for the different areas, NEC, REC, and so on. But I never saw an explanation on how you derive those points as to whether it's over 1 or less than 1. Where do you come up with those numbers?
Okay, let's James answer the El Nino one, and then Mark can talk about the economics.
So I think the question was about data collection. I'd have to go back and double check, but my understanding was there's a brief period of wave and water level data collection so we could calibrate the model. This is in the 2009 to 2011 timeframe. And as far as the core funding, any data collection, I don't believe we're doing that now, but I would have to check in with the USGS to see what was going on there and other agencies. But that's something I'd have to get back to everyone on.
And I would add that we don't need to necessarily collect data every year. Using the data, the years that we did collect data, we can then compare that with our incoming wave data that we have from buoys, see if the two are correlate well, and then use buoy data, hindcast buoy data, other data for other years. So hopefully we expect that we'll just be able to work at any year once we have the wave data, say from NOAA buoys, because that's where it all starts, bringing waves into the footprint, the model footprint.
So I want to introduce myself. I am Mark Bierman. I'm as you saw, the project manager and the economist. It's sort of rare to dual hat in that way, but the reason was I was sort of bored of my day job as the economist and looking for a challenge. When an opportunity came up to be the project manager on this study, I raised my hand. It's super interesting. I thought that it would be a good chance to get some project management experience. I'm not a surfer, but I'm a beach volleyball player, and so anything on the coast is sort of inherently interesting to me. I've done some surfing, not like these guys. In terms of benefit cost ratio and what counts as a benefit, to address that question, so really what we're talking about is future costs avoided, future adverse impacts. If we can improve things over what they would otherwise be, that's, we're trying to reduce those adverse impacts. So for example, if we project that without a project that there'll be damage to Highway 1 or additional repairs needed. If our, for example, sand placement projects can reduce the cost of those and reduce the occurrence of those adverse impacts, that would count as a benefit, and that would be a monetary value that would be in the B's, the numerator that goes over the costs. And so costs avoided, improvements to the recreational experience, maybe with a wider beach, with hopefully a wave climate that is still useful and for the surfers out there. We don't want to adversely impact that. We'll consider that. Any adverse impact that a project is projected to have to, for example, the surfing climate and to the wave action there, that would count as sort of a disbenefit of that alternative or measure. So we would count all of those in the benefit category. So, and if you have more questions about what constitutes benefits, I'd be happy to talk with you. We also have, we're going to put in the back, before you leave, you can grab a list of FAQs and a sort of overview of the project for you to take, and hopefully that'll answer some questions if they don't get answered during the 45 minutes or so that we have here.
Supervisor Horsley first, then in the back.
Well, I don't know if I need my mic, but I am concerned about losing Highway 1. And if we fool around in studies for another couple of years, we could be in that position. But if we took 140,000 cubic yards of sediment out of the harbor and dumped it on the beach, it's only going to last for 6 years. And if you did not do anything, any structural changes, or are you considering that you're going to have to do that, moving sediment out of that harbor on a continuous basis? And the other thing is that if the sand is moving south, what does that do to surfing? Is it going to improve the waves, or are we going to, instead of calling it Surfers Beach, are we going to call it Waders Beach? So I just don't, what is it, what's the impact?
John, will take the first part?
I got it.
It's a team effort.
All right. So, okay, I guess there was two questions there, right? One was about sort of the ongoing need if we go with the sand type solution. And yes, I guess I'll ask a question to others, frankly, to start this, which is, I don't think there would be, another 140,000 yards available in 6 years to repeat the process, right? Is that a safe statement? Yeah. So it would be very temporal in that sense, and we don't want to oversell it as being more than it is. I think to a lot of folk, there's a certain rightness, so to speak. It feels right to actually put the sand where some of us feel it should have been, and it's not. So there's opportunities too. We can let Max speak to this, to actually kind of work through some issues with the sanctuary that would be, a nice accomplishment in and of themselves, just in terms of being able to establish that precedent that we could do these kinds of projects. But representing that it's going to protect infrastructure beyond 6 years, no, that's a stretch. Doesn't mean it's not an appropriate investment, but it makes it a harder sell for the reasons you point out. And so that is why part of what's in the array of alternatives are more permanent type opportunities, or at least potentially more permanent, right? Until the actual evaluation is done. Things like a gap in the breakwater to allow sand to pass through, that seems kind of like a minimalist investment that could potentially have perpetual benefits. So from, you frame it that way, it sounds really promising. You talk to some engineers though, and they say, frankly, that sand passage process that we'd like to maybe see happen there could go the other way, or it could just sort of clog up and do nothing. And so it's, there's issues with that too. But anyhow, so permanence, we understand the need for that. Whether we can get to that within sort of the benefit cost ratio constraints that we're looking at here is a bit of a challenge. And what was the other? Right, yeah, if you're going to put a hard structure out, there are additional environmental considerations that come with that too, that we feel are less an issue when you're only talking about sand. And I'm trying to think if there was another part to your question that I didn't address yet. Sir, what happens if you
Oh, right. So is extra sand going to be good or bad for the surf there? My personal opinion is it probably would not be bad because the wave is good because of the reflection off the breakwater, not reflection off of the revetment at Highway 1. And so extra sand would just soften the reflection from the Highway 1 part, but it would not impact probably the sort of wedginess of the wave that occurs from the reflection off of the breakwater. And I see nodding from the people I look for nods from on that, so yeah. Okay.
We were just talking about how there may be an opportunity to configure the sand placement in a way that maximizes the kind of sandbar up in the corner there with the wave interference pattern, causes the wave to peak up a little bit.
Yeah, generally, the more sand you have, the more opportunity there are to get good bars forming that help with the break. So it's usually a good thing.
Let's not forget about if we do load it up with sand, and the sand is supposed to naturally flow to the south. The entire bay of Half Moon Bay is started with sand. You can see it all the way down to Half Moon Bay State Beach. So this project could then, in an indirect way, solve a lot of problems in the bay by bringing more sand to the south, creating better surf all the way down to Half Moon Bay State Beach. The surf has been suffering now for a long time compared to the 80s when I was a kid. It's just, there's not that much sand on the beaches as a direct result of it all getting trapped in the park.
In the back?
Brian just brought up the same issue I wanted to ask about, which is if you do the medium placement, you get possibly 6 years of sand on the beach, then you get possibly 36 years of sand close to shore in the 3-foot area. But after that, the sand doesn't go away. The sand might go out into the middle of the bay, it might go out into the ocean, it might go somewhere, but if you don't do that sand placement, there's already 50 years less sand than normal in Half Moon Bay itself, whether it's 40 feet or 30 feet or 20 feet or whatever. And as waves come into Half Moon Bay, you know, they break in a certain amount of water. And if there's less sand, they're going to break closer to shore. And that could speed up the erosion, I would think. So I would think that if you started putting sand in Half Moon Bay now, yes, it might be 6 years, 36 years, but it would also be hundreds of years that it would be somewhere. And it would be either in Half Moon Bay, it would be at Kelly Street, it would be at the Ritz-Carlton, whatever. But it's not permanent in its placement because it moves, but it's permanent in that it's additive. And right now we're getting a negative. I wanted to comment on that, but also on the feasibility study. The feasibility study has to do with whether the federal government is going to kick money in to do this sand placement. But the Harbor District just did dredging. They dredged, they put it in trucks, and they moved it, and they placed it. And it could be that if the feasibility study shows that it is not feasible for the federal government to add money into this project, this project could still be done. It's just that the federal government wouldn't spend the money on it. I guess my question is the feasibility study required by the Monterey Bay Sanctuary or Gulf of Carolina Sanctuary in order to make application?
I can try to speak to that, I think. Again, new project manager speaking here, but I think the answer is that the process that we're undertaking is developing alternatives, you know, understanding the effects of those alternatives on the environment, again, the effectiveness of how long the sand will be there, where it will go. Those are all things you would need to get a permit from the sanctuary. You need to complete the, you know, environmental assessment that looks at alternatives, not just a plan. You'd have to say, you know, what are the alternatives to the plan that we're ultimately recommending? And you got to do an analysis of what you think are the impacts of that plan. So I think, is that accurate to the rest here? So I think we may be doing a little more slowly because our hands are tied by the, you know, by the federal regulations, and we have to sort of, and the policies that we go by. But ultimately, if we can make some good progress, that ultimate EA and the feasibility report will look a lot like what would be in sanctuary's hands, and then make a decision before anything could actually happen anyway. So we're working towards that.
Never mind, I'll just chime in. This is Max Dolby from the Shoreline office. I would say that Mark described that very accurately, that that EA process is required every time they have to issue a permit. So, and we do want to see a range of alternatives. Oh, thanks. So, yeah, that would be a typical part of the process. We are here in the capacity as a regulatory body. I think something I want to point out today is that under the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, we do have quite a bit of flexibility in the types of activities we can approve. So there's various regulatory mechanisms we can look at here, and essentially my role here today is to track the process of this planning process so that we can vet some of those alternatives, work with the Corps, work with the community and others to figure out what makes most sense as we move forward. But that EA essentially is something that's very important for us to make a decision if what's proposed is consistent with our policies and our law.
Thank you. I'm actually a local realtor, and this may or may not be off topic, but I'll be addressing it to Peter Grinnell and the Army Corps of Engineers and also the supervisors Groom and Horsley. I do get the report from San Mateo County. It's either weekly or bi-monthly about the pollution. And there's typically every report always mentions the pollution at the harbor. And I was going to ask I was there with having lunch with the client, and we walked down towards the breakwater. And it was really, really smelly down that way. So I'm assuming it's the brackish water that gets caught in that little area, but I could be wrong. I'm certainly not a scientist. So my question to the engineers is, will the process of mitigating the erosion also address the pollution causes in the harbor, or is that something that the Harbor District or San Mateo County is going to be taking care of? And so all three of you entities can chime in.
Okay, yeah, the question of water quality in the harbor is something that is a priority of the Harbor District, has been, continues to be. In fact, the Harbor District is continuing to work with the San Mateo County Resource Conservation District, which recently completed an extensive study of fecal contamination within the harbor, and I commend you all to looking at those study results from the RCD. I'll just mention their primary findings, which are that near the so-called Capistrano Beach, immediately westward of Barbara's Fish Trap Restaurant, is one area where there have been chronic high coliform counts, and they have found that the origin of those high counts, which are primarily canine, come from upland, inland sources in El Granada. It's not from people walking their dogs on the beach. And the second location where there have been higher counts have been the Deer Creek outfall immediately adjacent and outside of the small boat launch ramp. There, the high counts are to a large extent bovine originated, and again, they originate from inland sources. And the RCD is trying now and continues to try to work with local population and property owners to address these sources of bovine and canine contaminations. In other words, it's not really originating in the harbor, it's where it ends up. The Capistrano Beach area, which County Environmental Health is well aware of, is an area where, in fact, circulation is not very good. And so, indeed, that area seems to collect and retain these higher counts. It doesn't dissipate throughout the harbor. The RCD study began, by the way, with a circulation study, and so they've intensively looked at how water moves in the harbor, and that set the stage for their subsequent researches. So those are things to keep in mind, that one can talk about concerns in the so-called harbor, but the ultimate solution rests with citizens on land, upland. And so as far as those sources go, the Harbor District, that's all outside of the Harbor District's jurisdiction. It's something that the county needs to address within its overall programs, and again, working with the RCD in terms of public education and awareness. So that's one major area about that. My understanding, and I'll turn it back to the Army Corps team, is that when they get to a stage where they would be doing the environmental assessment of a proposed project and its alternatives, environmental assessment presumably will include all the necessary variables, particularly the one that you're raising. And so I think that would come out of that. However, be advised that the Army Corps' project is aimed at, as you've seen, the Surfers Beach area immediately outside the breakwater. So exactly how they would address environmental impacts inside the breakwater remains to be seen, and you may want to comment on that. You should be aware, by the way, that the jurisdiction of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary ends right outside the outer breakwater, the Army Corps' federal breakwater. The Marine Sanctuary, correct me if I'm wrong, Max, but my understanding is that the sanctuary program does not have jurisdiction within that breakwater. However, if there were environmental impacts adverse to sanctuary resources in sanctuary waters, meaning that ocean outside of Surfers Beach, that originated elsewhere, upstream, on land, flowing in, then the sanctuary would have something to say about that. And then, of course, you would have to look at that question in the course of the Surfers Beach project environmental assessment once again. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll just go right around. Go ahead.
Sure. I have a question concerning urgency, specifically on Highway 1. If I understand what the presentation, it looks like mitigation, should it get funded, should we go forward, is 3 to 4 years away earliest. Where the erosion is within 18 inches of Highway 1 at this point, there's a chance we don't have 3 to 4 years before Highway 1 gets impacted. How does that factor into this project and your approach?
Well, there's a couple things that I want to touch upon that this addresses. Yes, this project, even were to go forward, would not happen in a time frame that probably would be advantageous to the protecting Highway 1 in that area right at the end of the existing revetment. That's a Caltrans issue at this point, which leads to my second comment that going to the economics, and Mark can expand if you want to, when we look at benefits, one of the things that we can't directly consider is benefit of protecting the highway if another agency has done something to already protect it. And it's a reasonable presumption that they would continue to protect it if we did nothing. So just in terms of the economic analysis, let's say if the highway fails, that's $100 million. We can't claim $100 million if Caltrans would protect it. You know, we can't claim anything other than maybe alleviating the maintenance on the structure itself. So the Caltrans issue on the short term, we wouldn't have a project. Putting the sand there would, if it were in time, would help some, but long-term protection and other is out of really another agency is going to have to step in on that.
Thank you, Chris Johnson, El Granada. First, I want to thank Mr. Dingler and his team. I mean, I really appreciate. There's a lot of thought put into this, a lot of brain power put into this. I just have a couple of general comments I want to say though, which is in 1959, the lid of Pandora's box was pulled off of this. A natural system was disrupted, and it will never be the same. And so the reason I bring that up is when we're considering solutions, you've got to consider that the breakwater was put in as a solution to a problem, and it created a problem. And the next thing that we put in to solve this problem is probably going to create some other problem. So what I'm asking is that the concentric circles around the problem solving on this have to be way out there, because even a breach of the breakwater is going to create another set of problems that are going to have to be dealt with. So that leads to my next point, which is, you know, when I hear the term cost-benefit analysis, that just always makes me nervous, because something like that is dependent upon the methodology. And in the way I look at it, there is no limit to the potential adverse economic effects that could result from the continued erosion of this section of the shoreline. And so then we get to the methodology of, you know, you're saying the $100 million for the failure of Highway 1 is not part of the cost-benefit of analysis because that's another agency. I mean, these are the kind of things that make me nervous. This needs to be a long-term, you know, as permanent as can be fixed. We cannot, if in the cost-benefit analysis, we cannot be doing studies and smaller fixes every 10 years or 20 years. I point to the Devil's Slide Tunnel. That was something that went on and on and on, and the road was closed and had to be repaired, and there was adverse economic effects. In 2006, many businesses went out of business. And finally, we've got a 50-year solution in there. And so what I would ask your group, Mr. Dingler, is we've got to look at the biggest possible ring of the concentric circle. This has got to be a long-term solution that otherwise I don't have any confidence in the cost-benefit analysis, because there's no amount of money that can be spent on this that won't be recouped depending upon how big your concentric circle is. Thank you very much.
In the back, yeah.
Thank you. I agree with Chris. That's a very good comment. I think that one of the most important concepts I've ever heard is that of unanticipated consequences. And it sounds like we're fighting with some of the consequences that weren't anticipated in 1959. Or maybe they were, and they were deemed acceptable risks. And I think in what you do, it would be very important for the future to have you put into writing your unacceptable consequences and your acceptable risks, so that people can do some kind of forward projections, and the community, which will be affected by those, can comment on those specifics. In fact, Caltrans and the county and the Midcoast Community Council and the community have been working for several years on alternatives for Highway 1. And I think part of what this CAP program should look at is maybe what would happen if Army Corps of Engineers and Caltrans were to move Highway 1 and look at other options for the community other than just the simplistic one of replacing sand on the beach. And I agree with the previous commentator that the pollution levels in the harbor could probably be mitigated if we look very closely at increasing the water flows. The current water flow patterns in the harbor are a result of not having adequate water exchange in the harbor. I know there were low oxygen levels in the harbor when I moved here in 1979. So this has been an ongoing problem, and I think one of the fixes and one of the concerns needs to be for the fishermen who need high oxygen levels in the harbor to keep the fish in their hold fresh and alive. And I think the other group of people that I don't necessarily see represented here are the people who live in the harbor. There's a number of people who I'm sure would be very, very interested. There are residents who have been there for many, many years, if not decades. And as housing prices raise, I think you'll see more and more people there. So I think there needs to be, on the part of the Harbor District and the Army Corps, a special outreach to those particular people. To sum up, we need a list of the unanticipated consequences and the acceptable risks, and we need to have the Army Corps also look at what it can do perhaps to help move Highway 1 in concert with the county and the Caltrans. Thank you.
On the left, and then I'll move back over.
Thank you. I'm Mike Wallace from Surfrider Foundation, and I just had a question, kind of a conceptual issue. You mentioned the starting point being the future mitigation of erosion, and I see kind of a contradiction there in terms of if you're replenishing sand in that area, assuming we go forward, you know, you're moving the goalposts. So you're setting back time by filling any sand in there, which is, you know, in our view is a good thing. But could you define how are you going to pick the starting date for that? Since it's kind of a moving target, and also as the study goes on, the sand is still moving out. So how do you actually define that starting point?
That's a good question. And people, I think, even internally, we sort of struggle with that. But really, it's, you know, the starting date is when can our project start being effective? So the starting date is not now because we can't do anything about what's happening this next 6 months or year, right? We are trying to anticipate those future impacts, and we're going to try to, at the time we place that sand there, we are, from that point forward, trying to reduce further impacts, future impacts. So that's really when the clock starts. We call that year zero in project terms, project planning terms. So.
Hi. So I'm going to just jump
Yes, please.
Make sure that really hit your question, because, you know, yes, we are temporally pushing the shoreline out perhaps to where it was pre current times, right? So we are in some ways doing the time travel that we said we can't do, but Mark's point is that the benefits that we measure are from project year 0 forward, because that feature we've put in, albeit a fairly wide sandy beach at the initial construction, it's serving a purpose going into the future. It's not actually, we're not proposing to say it's going to stay in that current width forever and that we've reset the shoreline, which I think was maybe the fundamental confusion with, yeah.
With 10 feet of shoreline, presumably, and it erodes at a certain amount a year, you just set the clock back.
Right, we're going back a little bit, but we're able to sort of put a benefit trail going forward associated with that.
So that's more defining for your economic.
Yeah.
And, you know, the goal of the project under the authority that we're working under is not necessarily to go back in time to replace something. We're trying to find a cost-effective solution to future problems or to additional problems. So, you know, there's not a bias that we should make things look like they were. If something else is more cost-effective, it can get us the results better than sand placement, that's it, right? That's what we would probably recommend, all else equal. So that's sort of the approach.
Okay, I'll take a question at the front table, then in the back, and then over.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Brennan, and I'm a harbor commissioner with the San Mateo County Harbor District, but I'm speaking as a member of the public and also a local resident today. We've talked about this already, but I want to get a little bit more specific or find out maybe where I can find the information I'm looking for. With regards to funding, there was a number discussed earlier, which was $5 million. And then there were other things discussed about how, in order to access that money, we have to qualify by being rated a 1 or a 2 or a 3. It was a little confusing. So is there $5 million available now? Have we not qualified for the $5 million yet? Is there more money potentially available than $5 million to maintain on an ongoing basis sand replenishment? Obviously, if we took the material which was outlined in your presentation and moved it, we wouldn't accumulate that amount of material within 6 years or however long that material stayed on the beach. But there is an ongoing accumulation within the harbor and an ongoing need for dredging within the harbor. So there could be the potential to move material on an ongoing basis, which might help replenish the material as it leaves. So I have lots of questions, but really want to understand the funding better because that's been really unclear to me for the last few years. And this presentation was great, but I just want to get a little bit more clarification on that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about that is that there are some other projects that relate to this area with regards to the coastal trail and also improving coastal access. And my understanding is the county wanted to move forward with some improvements in the area of Surfers Beach. However, it's really hard to spend money on improvements in an area where erosion is happening so rapidly. And because the future of this project is somewhat unclear, you know, it's like we've been waiting and waiting to find out more about what the Army Corps of Engineers was going to propose and what the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary might allow to move forward with other projects. And we're, you know, obviously we're not there yet, but there are impacts to that, which means that other projects that are important to the community, such as coastal trail access and beach access, could be delayed by sort of the unknown circumstances here. So those are things that I think the community's concerned about, and I'm sure the county's thinking about too. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, and then I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. In the spirit of transparency, I wanted to mention that in addition to General Manager Grinnell's comments about water quality within Pillar Point Harbor, you know, and I agree with what he said regarding the study from the Resource Conservation District. But just to be perfectly clear, we have had problems within the harbor related to sewage dumping from liveaboard boats. That's happened in the past. We know about it. There's also been problems where there has in the past, in 2012, been a leak from the sewer pipe that runs underneath Johnson Pier. That is documented, and at the Harbor District meeting this past Wednesday night, the board did vote to replace that pipe. So the pipe is old. It was put in when the pier was built in the 60s, and it's outlived its lifespan, and so the board did vote to replace the pipe. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess there was a question or two in there. Maybe I'll, on the one comment about, gosh, we don't know when a project, if it does happen, will happen, and what does that mean for trail planning and the like. Excellent point, and I guess, Peter, I know you convened a meeting some months ago with various agencies and project proponents to kind of actually have the very discussion you're saying needs to happen. So there's been some attempt to try to get everybody to the table to kind of say, well, who should move first, when, and how are all these things timing together, because your point's well taken. So that's maybe about all I'll say about that for now. And then the other money question, yeah, I'll do my little civics thing here. So, okay, we have the authority we're operating under, Section 111, is first and foremost a study authority. It allows us to look at problems of this ilk and make a recommendation that could lead to a project or construction authority, which is another level of authority, because now you're spending real money, not just study money. And the $5 million figure is sort of a subset where if the projects that you're recommending only require a federal investment that's $5 million or less, then we already have a programmatic authority from Congress to pursue that. We don't need to go get a new authority to build it. If, though, the finding is that we want to, for example, keep renourishing the beach in perpetuity, or whatever that timeline might look like, and that the costs associated with that would creep above the $5 million threshold, then we can go try to use this study authority, the recommendation coming out of the study, to get this bigger authority to actually, you know, do more perpetual kinds of renourishment cycles. So, so the study process itself is not limited to recommendations under 5 mil, but if we do find one that comes in under that threshold, our path is a lot easier in terms of not having to get that second construction authority. So there is no $5 million sitting in a bank somewhere. It's just kind of one of those thresholds we're mindful of when we're going through the study process. Does that answer the? That helps. Yeah.
Just comment before we get to the next questioner. Yeah, two things. One, on the public access question along Surfers Beach, our understanding at this point is that County Parks Department, which has developed an access project, it's in some stage of formulation, and Caltrans are supposedly communicating between each other about the point that was raised about access to and along Surfers Beach. There's an area of about 400 feet that is a public safety issue because of the narrowness of non-paved area on which public now is walking, and so County Parks and Caltrans supposedly are developing some kind of an approach to dealing with public access along and down to the beach. How that relates to the Corps project, whatever the final project decision turns out to be, whether it's sand replenishment or some other alternative as an outcome of their modeling process, remains to be seen. And basically, we would anticipate that there will be further communications from Parks, Caltrans, to and with the Army Corps about all of that. Beyond that, we don't have any other information. One other point about the idea of future sand replenishment. If, in fact, a Corps project were to end up being effectively a sand replenishment project, and by definition that would mean future replenishment activity once over whatever period of years realistically whatever was deposited had moved on. The question is, what might other sources be? Well, there would be a continued accretion behind the breakwater. As we've heard, what's there now has been put there over the last several decades. So any accretion would be rather less. It was mentioned that there are other potential dredging activities of the harbor district relating to its facilities right in the harbor. Again, several things need to be said. Number one, all the permit authorities, which include the Army Corps' regulatory branch, the Coastal Commission, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the State Lands Commission, need to basically review and approve any such dredging activity. Now, assuming that dredged material from whatever source in the harbor could be available for alternative placement, perhaps at Surfers Beach, that would need to be looked at, and if in fact that made sense along all of the variables, then that's a possibility. What might we be talking about? Just to give you a sense of scale, you've heard that the Corps has been calibrating their model based on a 140 to 150,000 cubic yard accretion behind the outer breakwater. The Harbor District, in contrast, just dredged its boat launch ramp and dredged 3,500 cubic yards. That's 3,500. That's a tiny fraction of what's behind the breakwater. And I'm mentioning this to indicate that when the Corps is doing its modeling, it would be presumably, and you can comment, they'd be looking at future replenishments and how much might be needed given certain assumptions of how wide a beach, how deep a beach, and so on, and balance that against potential other sources. If it turns out that, in fact, another 3,500 cubic yards basically doesn't amount to very much in terms of the feasibility of a new replenishment 6 or 10 years from now, where else might there be material available? And so those are things that are still, you know, we don't have the answers right now, but those are there. And I need to add one other thing to keep in mind. County Planning Department, as many of you are aware, is now in the middle of a comprehensive planning process for the Princeton area. One important component of that effort is the shoreline erosion situation. And one of the possible outcomes of that might be recommendations and preferences for sand replenishment along the Princeton shoreline. Well, where's that sand coming from? And so you have potential competition for the material that is currently resting behind the breakwater. So these are things to keep in mind. I'm just trying to indicate that this is not a simple situation. There are a lot of complex aspects to it and variables. So I just wanted to make that clear. So next question. Yes.
Hi, I live in El Granada, and I'm very interested in whether or not you have been working or coordinating with Caltrans, because they're doing their own erosion study, I believe. And my concern is, if we consider them just another agency, and they're doing, you know, their own erosion study, this is protection of Route 1, I assume, it'd really be important to work together with them and not consider them just a, quote, another agency. Is there any work being done now or contact with Caltrans about that?
Done
We have been in contact. We are aware of what they're doing, but we haven't actually collected or received any of the information from them. And it's something that we would incorporate, but we're not really, given the nature of this project, going to be working actively with with them in the big picture.
One over here and then over there.
My name is Leslie Ewing. I'm with the California Coastal Commission. And I just wanted to point out that many of the projects that are being discussed would, of course, need Coastal Commission review. And that our concerns are many of the things that have been expressed today. I'm so glad you mentioned the Coastal Trail. That's a very important project for the Coastal Commission. And this is a difficult stretch for that trail to be fit through. But it's a very important part of the underlying premise of the Coastal Act of providing coastal access. The harbor is an important area, so we want to make sure that concerns that happen here do not jeopardize the long-term viability of a commercial fishing harbor and a recreational boating area, of surfing, of beach access. There are a multitude of issues that are part of this project that aren't part of this project. This is part of a bigger picture of things that need to be and are being discussed. And I think it's important to try to find some way to bring that bigger picture together. The Coastal Commission will be looking at individual activities that are going on, but I think it's important to also recognize that this is not the solution to the issues going on. There have been water quality issues raised. The Coastal Commission, actually in the Coastal Act, has something about modifying structures specifically to address stagnant water conditions. It's a rarely used. I've been there for 20-some years, and I've never seen that part of the Coastal Act used. But if, in fact, there are water quality stagnation issues within the harbor that could be addressed through structural modifications, there is a point within the Coastal Act that would allow that to happen. The other thing that hasn't been raised yet is the issue of climate change and sea level rise. And so that the issues that are addressing the shoreline today may not be the solutions and the opportunities you want to look at for the next 50 or 100 years. It's not to say that it's not appropriate and important to address the issues going on today. But I think that it has to be put in the bigger context of both the overall issues going on within the harbor and the overall issues going on temporally for what will be happening here in the future.
Can I just say, because people have asked about county parks and Caltrans are doing, we have been talking to them about Highway 1 and their project, and we actually this afternoon again have a conference call with their engineers. So it's not as if everybody's operating in a vacuum. We've actually had Coastal Commission staff as well as Caltrans, as well as, and I know that the Corps has been involved in it to some extent as well. So it's not. I just wanted to let you know that we are concerned about doing something, at least a temporary solution for Highway 1.
Did everyone hear the supervisor's comment? I'll assume a yes. Okay.
Actually, that addressed my question.
Oh, okay. Bob?
Didn't give me one of these. Again, my name is Bob Mateo. Besides being a surfer, I'm also a coastal engineer. I'm really encouraged by what I'm hearing today, and a couple of items I wanted to mention. I really want to echo what Leslie Ewing said of the Coastal Commission. I think there's a bigger picture here that perhaps goes beyond the authority or responsibility even of the Harbor District and the Army Corps, and certainly sea level rise is very important. And so, but I think like a lot of us, we've been watching water boil, and we're seeing a few bubbles, and we're a little anxious to get something done. So, I think the idea of placing sand as an embankment, I know that's not your decision, but I think that's something that I expect that I could support. We've done that up at Ocean Beach. It has had some benefits, and it buys time for some of these other things that I think need to happen. And I think those other things are we need probably a bigger tent with some leadership to look at the full range of objectives, including sea level rise. And I don't know if that's the Mid-Coast Council or the county or someone, but I think we all need to work together towards that. And that's the other benefit of what the Corps and the Harbor District are doing. We're really developing, I think, a pretty mature discussion and understanding of the situation, and so it's very helpful. Thanks.
We have time for a couple more questions. We're approaching noon. Yes, there's one.
Yeah, I wondered, is the original study still available? Do you have copies?
Original study, what are you referring to?
For the original harbor plan. Yeah, I was just kind of interested in, like what water depths might be.
Here. There's more to this. You talk about an original harbor plan. As a matter of fact, there were a number of different harbor plans back in the 1970s. Breakwater plan. I would have to defer to the Corps. We do not have the original thing.
Yeah, that study exists. It's a public document. And was your question that is it available? Can you find it? I don't know the best way necessarily. Probably me finding it and posting it online or sending it around. So
Mark, you'd have to do a Freedom of Information Act.
Even though it's already presumably public?
They just
okay.
want a record of it.
Okay,
So
okay.
contact probably JD.
Yeah, so we'll put that on. Oh, that's right. He's a good person to ask. That's one of our do-outs then will be to make that available somehow.
And then the question associated with some of the things that we're talking about here, anticipating.
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think anyone here does. But like you, we'll dig into that report and
I mean, I know at the time, in general, I mean, this breakwater did a lot better than another one a little south of here in Santa Cruz, right? And so what I do know is that when they were looking at putting in this, basically a feature that blocks sediment transport in Santa Cruz, there was definitely consideration given. They got it wrong, but there was an estimate. So I guess categorically, I would presume that, back in the day, these were the kind of things, what's this going to do to sediment transfer, et cetera, that were being considered by the engineers. What this specific one said, we have to go double check, but yeah. Okay. Craig's giving me a prod. Yeah, following up on Leslie's comment on sea level rise, any scenario, any project alternative we recommend will be analyzed against multiple scenarios of future sea level rise. So we have some guidance on that that's basically consistent with a couple other federal agencies in the West Coast states that we follow for that.
And I would just follow up with that and say that the consideration of sea level rise, at least as I see it, sort of a double-edged sword. It's going to make if we do nothing, impacts worse if sea level rise is higher than, sort of historically. But it's also going to make your project potentially less effective at preventing impacts. So you have to consider both of those. And again, as a project manager, it's my job to manage expectations. And like Leslie said, this is not going to solve all the problems. And we have a limited statutory budget that we can work within. And even within that, we've got to show that what we're doing is cost effective. And so those are the hurdles that are in front of us. And we're doing the technical work to try to find the best project that is cost effective that we can actually implement sooner than later.
I think it's time for us to wrap up, but I need to mention that on the back table, the court team has left a handout of frequently asked questions. It's actually quite informative. I urge you to pick up a copy of it. Yeah, and leave your cards. And let me thank you all for attending, and we will be keeping in touch with you on the future. Thank you.